time we want to bring in Judge Lou again, because Cheryl, and maybe you can ask the question, there's been a lot of confusion over the verdict slip. First trial, this trial, to the point where yesterday, not only did the jury have a question about it, but they had to make an amended verdict slip.
Right.
Does this change things going forward? Are we going to come up with a new system where we can make things a little bit more clear?
You know, that's a good question. I mean, so the fact that it's come up a couple of times now in this case, both trials, maybe this is time. You know, there is no case law that supported what the defense wanted the judge to do, and she said that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not an opportunity to make changes if you notice that something isn't working that maybe had been working in the past. So it's a good question for the judge. You know, he's sat on so many of these cases. So, Judge, what do you think about that?
I don't have an ESP, but I'll suggest that any change will not be an order from on high from the Supreme Judicial Court, because there's no case queued up to go up to the Supreme Judicial Court on this issue. But it might seep its way into continuing education that mass trial judges get a lot of. From two different organizations. So they may well discuss this in their continuing education and just informally make changes to verdict slips.
And Judge, obviously very difficult to talk about another judge's decisions, right? The deep respect that you have for one another. Did you have any problem with the way this was handled? Because over the past couple of days, mainly from people who were super passionate about the case, they felt very strongly that here we go again. It's just not clear enough, especially for 12 civilians who were pulled off the street with no legal background. Did you have any issues with the way that was handled? Do you think that things could have been done differently to make sure that they never went through this confusing process?
I actually think the judge handled it perfectly. I don't think that's a big deal. I could nitpick over a few things here and there in the 7-week plus trial, but the verdict slips, in my view, were fine. The defense really threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the judge. The judge did remarkably well with all the things that they did. Personally, I'm not sure I would have had the state police doing crowd control, where the state police are a key issue in the case, but that's all water under the bridge.
So, Judge, I know that, you know, we were talking about the questions that came into the jury yesterday. You know, a lot of folks at home were really thinking, why couldn't she answer that question when they said, you know, what if we had a verdict on 2 of the charges, but we're deadlocked on 1 charge? Does that mean we're a hung jury? And she said, I can't answer that question. And, you know, a lot of folks were saying, well, why can't she answer that? Why can't she just say, no, you can deliver a partial verdict? And you and I talked about this yesterday afternoon, and you said that the judge has a very different responsibility once the jury starts deliberating.
Yeah, it's complicated, but it's critical to the public's understanding. Once the jury is deliberating, the judge's role changes. The judge becomes more of a potted plant, and that is because the jury worships the judge. In the slightest little thing that the judge says can push them with exaggerated effect towards some result, and that's wrong. So by even discussing a hypothetical question, it could push them toward or away from whatever's in the hypothetical question. She did it exactly right. It would have been problematic for her to do it in any other way.
And you know, the judge really at this point, this is Courtney Cole, Judge Lou, the judge really at this point, it seems like she was very careful when they came back with these questions to remind them, you all have the evidence. It is your job to make this decision. I can't make these decisions for you. They had a very specific question yesterday about the time frame for the operating under the influence charge. And when they came back and they asked, it was their very first question, they wanted to get into specifics about the 12:45 a.m. on January 29th, 2022, when Reed left Fairview Road, but that's when the judge came back. And I think for us watching at home, it's interesting because you expect the judge to be able to give a more direct answer. But to your point, Judge Lou, the judge told them, you have all of the evidence laid out. I can't make this decision for you. And I think that was interesting for viewers to hear at home who've been watching the case.
Yeah, anytime on the date on the indictment, the jurors have the originals of the indictments. Anytime on that day is convictable. And Mr. Brennan made one of the few missteps of his magnificent trying of this case. He said, give a time frame. That's incorrect. Unless there's a bill of particulars, and there was not in this case that I can recall. So the judge, there is no time frame. It could be at 4 a.m. if it's on the right date on the indictment. It's not the judge's role to intrude on what the jury decides.
And, you know, one of the other things that I think a lot of folks asked as well is, you know, the judge decides what the sentence is once the verdict is read. Once they deliver a verdict, if it's a conviction, the judge determines the sentence based on a sentencing report and on recommendations by the prosecution and the defense. And the jury has nothing to do with that, right?
They have zero to do with that. And it actually relates to your first question. The jury cannot be concerned with results or with outcomes or anything like that. The juror's responsibility is to speak the truth. Did they prove this case according to the jury instructions? It is not the jury's responsibility to give a result that is just. It is their responsibility to say, here's the truth about what happened. And then somebody else will decide the sentence if the defendant is convicted.
So in so many of these cases that, you know, that we've seen, and especially in this one, it seems like the jury really took this case quite seriously. I mean, they went through the evidence, they asked the questions. Even at the last minute, after they had delivered a verdict, changed their minds and said, wait a minute, we're not sure. We don't have a verdict. You know, I know that you said it's pretty unusual and that you had never seen it in your career, right? Is that right?
That's right. That's right. All the signs are that they used the utmost care in this case. You know, they had 18 jurors to begin with, and they ended with 18 jurors. And I say it's because of the judge's handling of the jury with compassion and the 18 jurors' moral commitment to doing justice over a 7-week plus trial. And that continued all the way through deliberations. They were long past the point where you might say, oh, the jury's just trying to make it look good because they know everybody's watching. They were long past that. They were at the point where people there had to have been some fighting going on in the jury room. And obviously we heard about tears, so there was some strong disagreement in the jury room. All the signs are that this jury was superbly careful about their duties.
Judge Jack Lew, thank you.